Warning! This review contains spoilers. Subnautica is a game that takes place underwater. That's it. Thanks for watching. Okay, maybe there's just a bit more to it than that. Subnautica sees you as an apparently unnamed employee of a big spacefaring organization called Altera, and you join the main character as his escape pod is falling towards a nearby planet and the huge capital ship you were launched from crash lands. During the tumultuous descent, an inside panel of your pod breaks off and strikes your character in the head, causing him to black out for a few hours. When he comes to, he, and therefore you, have no idea what really happened, but you are now stuck on what appears to be an ocean planet with almost no supplies. Now, I have to admit, when I first dipped my toes into the water, I was expecting a very two-dimensional experience. But oh my lord, this game has story in spades. You have to figure out what became of the Aurora, which is the name of the crashed capital ship, and its crew, while also learning about the ship's mission to find another previously missing ship that disappeared around a decade ago. You get to slowly pick apart these mysteries, all while trying to learn more about this unique and interesting planet, and also trying to find a way off of it. Honestly, the layers of this story are incredible and interact with each other really well, all while meshing with the gameplay perfectly by gradually sort of prodding the player in the right direction. The way this is achieved, at least in the earlier segments of the game, is with life pods and the radio. Essentially, you aren't the only escape pod to have launched, and the radio will occasionally pop up and play a transmission from one of the other life pods, and then give the player coordinates, or, a little later, vague instructions for how to find them. The life pods are designed in such a way that getting to each one poses a slightly different challenge, and of course, they gradually get harder. Getting to each one will fill in a little more information about the Aurora, but invariably, either nearby or on the way, you will find wrecks and ship parts that will progress your playthrough. This will continue until an average player has enough information, resources, and frankly balls to explore the downed ship, where an astute player should find designs for a rocket. This is where a lesser game would start to wrap up, but this is roughly where Subnautica really steps up a notch by showing you the real reason why the ship crashed. It was shot down by an ancient gun turret that stopped ships from arriving or leaving due to a highly contagious virus, which you now have. This adventure has only just begun. From here, the radio goes quiet, but the game has now given the player all the information and motivation they need to improve their tech and dive deeper and deeper to, get to the bottom of things. Oh, sorry, I couldn't help it. But honestly, I could talk for ages about how the story interacts with the world and how the world interacts with the story. They exist in a symbiosis that is almost beautiful to experience. In the early game, you will be able to build an item called a scanner, and whenever you scan a new thing, be it a fish, a monster, a rock, or a piece of a machine, a page about it will appear in your log, telling you all about it. This provides a very believable way to not only flesh out the world, but also for the developers to gradually provide subtle hints directly to the player. This fish is edible. This item could be used in fabrication, for example. Small gameplay hints are even sometimes dropped by the narrative. At certain points, you get to hear voice logs of the crew lost a decade ago. One of them pretty clearly states that in place of more conventional materials, they have been able to use a monster's body part instead, and even suggests how to procure them. If you listen to the voice logs, that is, it is entirely possible, though probably a bit tricky, to play this game without engaging with the story at all. The story rarely plays out live, you just find abandoned PDAs which add their data to your own. It is then up to you to find a safe place to stop and read these entries. So, it's worth noting that there is quite a lot of reading to be done in a first playthrough of Subnautica, which not everyone will be okay with. The game does have voice actors for the voice logs, which is very welcome, but the myriad other PDA entries are text only, and a lot of them are just too important to ignore. I personally didn't have any problems with this, as I was so enthralled that I was happy to find any new information that I could, but I get it's not everyone's cup of tea. Changing the subject, I really love the gradual progression deeper and deeper this game provides. I think for the most part, the pacing is masterful. Early game, the radio provides its guidance at a very agreeable rate on a first playthrough, being neither so often it feels overwhelming, nor so rare that you're left confused what to do next. Then, later, new items and raw materials are introduced slow enough that each new acquisition feels like an accomplishment, while not being so slow the game gets stale. I say for the most part though, because the pacing comes to a grinding stop at the moment you enter what I will call the chamber, and you are tasked to find items from across the world. Then, after that, you have to build the rocket, which involves much gathering and retreading of old biomes. This reminds me a lot of Zelda Wind Waker, as at a point near the end, the narrative comes to a grinding stop, and you are asked to explore and find the Triforce pieces. On my first playthrough, I really enjoyed it. Exploring the enthralling world was excellent fun, but on subsequent playthroughs, it quickly becomes a slog that the majority of people dislike. I feel this is likely very similar to Subnautica. I really enjoyed this slower part of the game, but I hear its dislikes, and I get the feeling that if I ever replay Subnautica, I shall understand why. I think encouraging the player to gradually build the rockets as they progress the storyline, and having the fetch quest exist solely inside the chamber, would have alleviated this problem. I also feel that while myself, and probably a lot of other people, were propelled nicely by the subtle hints this game provides towards the right solutions, a lot of the fuel for this behaviour lies in the curiosity and reasoning of the player. This leads me to suspect that a player who lacks that kind of curiosity or prefers a more overt story may struggle to care long enough to get very far with Subnautica. The atmosphere does a lot to keep a player intrigued, but a player who doesn't enjoy unlocking a mystery may struggle to enjoy Subnautica. Another thing I love about this game is how successful the story is without any antagonist. I suppose, in a lot of ways, the antagonist is the planet itself, being infested with all types of creatures of all shapes and sizes, some passive, and others very much not. I've mentioned in several of my other reviews that I don't particularly like horror games. Not exactly because I don't like being frightened, but I don't like jump scares because they are too cheap, and most other efforts to horrify me tend to cause my eyes to roll. I would, however, like to put forward an opinion that I know at least the person who turned me on to playing Subnautica shares with me, and that is that Subnautica isn't a game of horror, it is a game of terror. Similar, but importantly different. The pure, abject terror experienced when being chased by a Reaper Leviathan or in the vicinity of a Ghost Leviathan while inside the Cyclops is universal and unavoidable. The game does such an excellent job of raising the stakes with the fairly punishing vehicle and death mechanics that happening across one of these monsters when unprepared and filled with unsaved goodies could make even the biggest person scream like a schoolgirl. Don't believe me? Try it yourself. My only criticism is that early game I don't think death is much of a deterrent, and narratively, respawning the player back at base with some of their recently collected items missing is never explained by the game and makes absolutely zero sense. A feature that takes the player to a previous save or quick save in order to take the player out of continuity with the character would have been better for the narrative and the immersion. But I get the feeling that a conscious decision was made here between narrative and gameplay was chosen. For the record, the correct decision was probably reached, but it defo ruins immersion for a few moments and is quite confusing. The only other thing I didn't love about this game is that while it does a great job at pointing you towards certain things to explore, it is really bad at telling you if you've missed anything. When I say really bad, it just doesn't at all. This makes it very, very easy to get stuck, as I did. I'm being careful as I don't want to totally ruin it for someone who hasn't played it yet. But at one point, the game points you to investigate a particular place. Let's say a particular cave. In said cave, there are lots of cool, useful things to discover. So I went in, scanned everything, and left, not knowing there was a cavern I had not seen, and not knowing there was a unique item in this cave that was required for progression. I then left, and continued deeper into the game, unaware I had essentially left the main storyline behind. I eventually knew I needed the missing item, but I had absolutely no idea where it could possibly be. And of course, I would never return to this cave because, as far as I was concerned, I had fully cleared it. Luckily, I had a friend to bail me out without me having to Google it, and potentially spoil too much. I'm honestly unsure how this could be remedied without compromising the excellent atmosphere and the feeling of very little hand-holding, but it definitely feels like a hole that should be plugged. One last thing of note is that I played this on the Switch. I don't know what other versions of this are like, but honestly, it was pretty buggy. Sometimes water would fail to load, the game fully crashed once or twice, and I have to say, I hate that the scanner room forgets which items can scan on every load into the game. This honestly caused me to occasionally change my priorities in-game according to my real-world plans. For example, I will scan and find this item I need now instead of later, which was my original plan, because I need to stop playing soon, and when I come back, I probably won't be able to scan for the item I want. I get this was more likely some sort of limitation the developers had rather than an actual game design choice, but my lord, it is annoying. Overall, despite teething issues, I have to say that Subnautica has a lot of class. It won't hold your hand through its story, but if you care to look for it, you will find a nuanced story that fits the world and gameplay like a glove. The gameplay is a lot of fun, mostly makes sense, and is all underscored with an absolutely banging soundtrack that will stick with you even beyond your play sessions. I'd even recommend this to someone who usually doesn't like horror games, such as myself, as, at least in my opinion, this game works on a completely different energy. There is, of course, nothing wrong with needing a more directed story or not gelling with the vague hints. But if that isn't you, what are you doing? Go play Subnautica.